Welcome back. I'm Barry Hensley, the Chief Threat Intelligence Officer at Secureworks. And I tell the team each day I'm blessed to lead our counter threat unit. I also believe we're uniquely positioned as our research group actually works closely with our security analysts, our incident responders, and our adversarial testers each day. And of course, our software engineers that are developing our Tejas platform. It is my privilege this morning to introduce Tony Sager. As Wendy mentioned earlier, Tony is the Senior Vice President and Chief Evangelist for the Center for Internet Security as he leads the development of the CIS critical security controls. I have personally known Tony for about 15 years, as he's been a longtime mentor for myself, but also a very close friend from my DoD days. So I know we could not have asked for a better security professional to address this event today. Tony retired from the National Security Agency almost 34 years ago as a mathematician, a computer scientist, and a senior executive leader, which is where I had an opportunity to see Tony's inspirational leadership and impact firsthand. Tony, I'm not quite sure I'll ever forget your retirement ceremony as you took the time to honor so many people that you had served with over the years, but also this the personal touch that you took that day, and it was just an indication of just your passion for everything you do and the people you serve with. I am going to read your abstract for this morning, and it's From Attacks to Action, Managing Threats That Matter. Tony will share insights from a long time of his cybersecurity lessons he has learned from his career as a vulnerability analyst. He'll describe how vulnerabilities, threat analysis, security testing, and incident response have evolved. And more importantly, he will discuss how we can collectively make sense of these threats, risk, and translate them into positive, constructive, prioritized actions at scale for individual enterprises. Please join me in welcoming the great Tony Sager to this Global Threat Intelligence Summit. Tony, it's great seeing you.
Barry, I'm overwhelmed and touched by your generous introduction. Thank you very much. And yeah, for those that don't, Barry and I go back quite a ways. I had the honor of supporting the work that he was doing in the Defense Department back then. And a lot of things people forget. Almost everything that happened, Barry, right, was a first of. We're figuring this out as we go, inventing the airplane on flight or whatever the term might be. So it's really an honor to be invited to be a part of this also. So thank you all very much. So let me share the activity here. I think the opening speaker talked a bit about, I'm sorry, let me just grab a quick, find a window here. Hold on. The opening speaker talked about having to cover 20 years in 20 minutes. And I get it. That's a challenge. I think in deference to my age, I get 45 minutes to cover 45 years. So I have literally been at this for 45 years. My anniversary date, entered on duty, they call it, at the National Security Agency was last Friday. And so it's been quite a wild ride. I wish I could tell you that, I had some great vision as to what was going to happen in this industry and was lucky enough to sort of align myself with all those important themes. But the fact of the matter is it was mostly blind luck. A lot of things happened, and all for the good, some challenging, some constructive, and some still echo today. So I'll give you a little bit of history today to talk about this whole business of risks. That was the topic we discussed, from attacks to action, managing the risks that matter. And, this business of risk is the thing that consumes us all today. And every bit of work that you do and all the great companies in the industry and across the government, all contribute to our understanding and our ability to take action. So that's kind of the bottom line. I'll go through kind of my thinking on this, the kinds of events that have shaped my thinking and the lessons that I took from that. And I hope that some of that resonates with you and give you a chance to think about it. So again, I stumbled into this career. I was a young undergraduate math major at a tiny liberal arts college that no self-respecting government agency would ever recruit at. But I happened to bump into an alum of the math department there who, and think of this again, the mid-70s. This person was the perfect NSA recruit and employee of the day. He had an advanced degree in math and grew up as a native Russian speaker and was a U.S. citizen. So that was a key to getting in. And he asked me what I was going to do after I got my degree. And I said, I'm not quite sure. And he mentioned this place that I'd never heard of, NSA. And I wound up applying thanks to him, and took the hardest math test of my life and managed to survive it just enough to get in the door. And that started me on a career that I'll tell you a little bit about. It's not about me, but it's about the events and all the the forces that shape the world that we see today. So I grew up, initially in the business of studying vulnerability. And I've had a lot of background also in formal computer security. So this is a sort of a 70s, 80s way to think about this problem. This is not mathematics. This is a conceptual way to think about it. And the notion here is risk is a function of three primary variables: vulnerability, threat, consequence, and sort of integrated loosely over countermeasures. A more modern term might be controls. But what are the things that we can control or do to help us manage the value of these other variables? And so the job that I was hired into, and remember the times, 70s, 80s, seems very quaint by today's standards, but we thought of the US as having sort of one enemy conceptually, right? This was a nation versus nation fight, not about the economy, but about the nations. And how much did we actually understand about the threat from these other nations? Well, it turns out not very much, even if you were an insider in the government with lots of security clearances. And so one way we tried to understand or make sense of risk was we'd hire a room full of people to pretend to be the threat, right? They would emulate the adversary to reveal the vulnerabilities in our systems. And then we could make decisions, right? Should we work around that? Can we design around that? Is that vulnerability big enough for us to worry about? And we would look at that with an eye towards the consequences, right? What were the consequences of this? And so it's important to sort of, I put this up every once in a while to remind myself as to what's important, right? And a lesson to take away is these things are always running, these variables. If you think of them again as mathematics, and they have a value. And the value can go up or go down. And the way we design our defenses, the way we implement controls or countermeasures allows us to manipulate things like vulnerability. We could patch things, we could put in place controls and so forth. But no matter what you do, no matter how much you spend, no matter how much insight you have to remember that you can't drive your vulnerability to zero. Or if you happen to accidentally do so at some magic moment, something's going to change immediately. And so you have to be constantly trying to understand the value of these vulnerabilities. Threat, there's a lot of unknowns there, right? And there's a lot of great analysis now happening in the marketplace, including from folks like Secureworks, to help us better understand threat. And again, when you come from my background, you think of threat as the actors is the term, right? Bad actors, what are their intentions, what are their capabilities, and what is their interest, and what are their outcomes that would be useful for their purposes. And consequence is always about, in the eye of the decision maker or the system owner or the business owner, what could be the negative consequences here? So these are things that you always have to keep in mind conceptually at some level, and also recognize that you can't, for example, if you spend all your money on vulnerability, you have no ability to deal with these other aspects of the risk issue. So I just mention this because it pervades my thinking and helps us think about these problems sort of at a strategic level. So my career, as I mentioned, I sort of stumbled through it, and I started in the lower left here. So the honest truth of my recruitment and hiring at NSA, I wound up taking that hard math test, and then 45 years ago, got a call in the middle of September. Son, and that's how older men spoke to a young fellow like me back in those days. Son, if you can report in 2 weeks, you have a job. I said, well, that's great. What is this job? He said, well, I can't actually tell you. I said, what? He goes, well, the job is actually in ComSec, we call it, or communication security. And we'd like to offer you a spot in our intern program. I said, well, great. What is ComSec? And he goes, well, I can't really tell you that either. But if you want to know more, this is a true story, go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and look up the article on cryptography. And he had to spell it for me because I'd never heard of such a thing. And I said, okay. And he said, but you got to give me an answer real quick because in 2 weeks, this job is gone. And now as a experienced warrior in the bureaucratic systems, I realized the fiscal year was running out at the end of September. So they either had to give the job to somebody or the job would disappear. So I said, well, he said, do you need more time to think about it? And I said, no, I don't have another job. I'll see you in 2 weeks. So I showed up, communication security. I started in really crypto mathematics, studying US algorithms, studying randomization, initialization, key management, and all the things that went with that at the time. And that was really the place to learn such things at that time in the world, at least in the free world. And the notion was about equating the difficulty and the challenges of security with hard mathematical problems. And that's why it's always been a game among mathematicians. But my life changed forever in the very, very early 80s, maybe 80 or 81, with the explosion of what we called then the personal computer revolution. So the notion of having an Apple II Plus on my desk was like too tempting. So I switched career fields from math to computer science. And in a really unusual career at the National Security Agency, I spent my entire 34 and a half years there in defense, which is not considered a great career path, but worked out for me. But what we saw, and all these little bubbles here on this chart, are organizations or the names of missions in which I worked. And so what you see as you kind of run up the left side there is the expansion of the security problem and the way we dealt with it. So from communication security to things like the system that supported the communications, or the computers that were part of that, or the information. So we went from sort of information to technology back to the information. And we coined a term some decades ago, assurance. That is, what is the confidence or the measurement of my ability to make decisions about the information and about the systems that support it. That whole middle stripe, and this is where I met Barry, I started to shift into sort of away from this conceptual security and the mathematics to this messy, grunty operational mess of real life and dealing with defending computers, the notions of what we call then defensive information operations. That is, late 80s, we started to move from, gee, we better pay people to pretend to be the bad guy so we can learn from it, to, hey, real bad guys are attacking us every day. What are we learning from it? And so that was the idea that really helped shift my career from the technology to really information and the operations that those things supported. And I spent a lot of time also sort of to the lower right there. I spent a couple of years out at Sandia National Labs. Very similar work, but focused on the safety and security of nuclear weapons control systems. And so, this whole field of cybersecurity, and that was really kind of the capstone naming here, built up from a lot of government-driven research, the development of things like secure radios for the U.S. Army, and sort of brought all these things together. And as you can tell, as you sort of move your way up this diagram, you get sort of more and more general, right? The problem gets broader. The term gets more general until we hit what I call the all-purpose undefined word of cyber, which is I remember at some point, and don't rat me out on this, Barry, I remember at some point thinking, wow, we've got thousands of brand new cyber warriors walking the halls of NSA, and most of them can't spell IT. It became the thing, right? We all were part of this, the growth of the industry that we see today. And so I used to joke also, if I'd have stayed a couple more years, maybe we would have dreamed up something bigger like cosmic security, and I would have been fortunate enough to be a part of that. But the lessons learned over this really have shaped the work I've done, during the last third of my career and ever since. So a couple of things I'll share with you. If I could talk about the seismic shifts briefly that I watched over the years. I mentioned from ComSec to cyber, right? From the focus on mathematics and the security of algorithms to this all-purpose focus on networking, on real life operations, what we call cyber today. Again, mathematics was the king of the sciences back in the day. All these other things are the world that we live in today. And I've already seen some great examples of that in the discussions here at this event. From technology to information, of course. But the real one that shaped me was, I have a talk I used to give, I am a reformed government monopolist. Back in the 70s and 80s, the model was the government will work this problem. The government defines this problem. You pay your taxes. We go fight the bad guys over there. And this is about how do we, defend ourselves nation to nation. But this has changed dramatically in the last couple of decades, right? This is about the users, the information, the marketplace, and all these things. We went from what I call the control model of security. That is, when it was a government monopoly, the government decides what the problem is and who gets to play and who are the acceptable contractors and what is the technology that's safe enough to use. And now we live in this wide open commercial marketplace, right? Where second to market is last to market. And so we see rapid change, lots of exploitable conditions. And that's just the world that we live in. And it really seems like it's going to be difficult going back. But also foundationally, we went from this sort of nation to nation, our nation is concerned about rival nations, to this really foundational model of economic and social risk. And this is both a challenge for folks like me who've been doing this for a long time, but it's also the right answer. That is, as social creatures, we're used to dealing with risk, whether it's safe to fly in a commercial aircraft or what doctor and hospital do I use, is a consumer piece of goods safe enough. All these kinds of things involve risk in our lives that we've learned to navigate, right? To create structures to create things like building codes and licensing and certification of products and people. All these mechanisms are ways that we learn to navigate complex issues that are really technically beyond the reach of the average citizen, but still we need to make rational, not perfect, but rational decisions about them. So this is the nature of the business and really the path that we've been on for the last couple of decades now. So a couple other things I'll share with you, sort of personal lessons for me about the life that I've lived. And this one hurts me. Knowing about flaws doesn't get them fixed. So I grew up with this idea, right? We pay a room full of smart people. They look at our systems. They identify flaws in mathematics and technology and software, hardware designs. And we tell people about them. Hey, and somehow people will get really smart and they'll say, you know what? Thanks for pointing that out. We'll fix it. Well, that has not been a workable model for the decades that I've been in this. It is important work, don't get me wrong. It's classically hard work, right? It's not easy, but just pointing out flaws doesn't get them fixed, because fixing things is more about behavior, right? It's more about incentives. It's more about the sort of things that we associate with decision making as opposed to technology. And it's important to keep that in context, or you'll get frustrated in this business. I also note that in cyberspace, we all have more in common than we do that's different. That is, a lot of classical security frameworks start from an assumption that we're all special snowflakes, and that oh my goodness, the risks of your business, the connectivity and the dependencies are all unique. The risk appetite, it's called, of your managers is different. And so you need to pull all that information together, right, along with complicated threat feeds and lots of technical information to decide what you need to do. And it's my experience that most enterprises cannot do that. They don't have the people, the information, the ability, and it's not because they're bad, it's that they're doing other things. And so, but the observation, having seen, my career has been about observing vulnerability, learning how to manipulate systems to find problems. And it turns out that the vast majority of time, what you're finding are things that are repeats. And whether we test in the lab or where the bad guy tests for us, we're finding over and over again that most attacks, there's a lot of great, clever tradecraft. Again, don't let me underplay this. But at the heart of it, there's a lot of things that are repeated, right? We're getting hit by millions of repeats of the same patterns because they work. And so if you treat the bad guy as performing magic, and you'll hear it in the literature and in the language of the business, right? Oh, how could I possibly defend myself against a nation state adversary? And the bad guy only needs to find one flaw, and the good guy has to fix millions of unknown flaws. If you treat this as a problem of magic, and the wizardry is the model that I talk about a lot, then you have no defense other than to hire more magicians of your own, right? And to do your own magic. And that is not a sustainable way to defend yourself in any case. It's also important to remember that it can be daunting if you look at any of the classic control catalogs, that is the list of things that you could do to defend yourself. It's a bit overwhelming. But the bottom line is, you still have a limited number of defensive choices. And there's something, if you're familiar with what is usually called the 80-20 rule, or sometimes the Pareto principle, named after, of course, I think some Italian mathematician of centuries ago. The notion is that you get most of your value from your first set of choices. And this is philosophy. This is not the mathematics. It's about how do I choose wisely the foundational set of things that I can do that give me the most value, right? The 80% of my value. And it turns out, I believe strongly, that there are such things. And again, I've observed this over decades and tried to build sort of ideas around it. We'll come back to that in a bit. The other thing I'll mention, the life lesson for me, is that cyber defense is really about information management as opposed to technology, as opposed to training. Those are important. We need those. We need better technology. We need better defenses. We need better awareness of management and all that. But, there's a sort of a mantra in the DC area. If we just share everything, then everyone will suddenly be smart, and will be, they'll all know how to defend themselves, and we'll go on with democracy and capitalism. But that has not proven true in my experience at all. And I often say that the most important verb in this business is not sharing, it's translate. How do I translate millions of data points of bad things into a relatively small number of things that are positive, constructive, that I can do, that I can execute, right? This is not about creating a nation full of threat intelligence experts. This is about translating that knowledge into concrete things that we can do something about, that we can build into market incentives, that we can build into regulation when necessary, that we can teach people to do, that we can encourage them to buy tools that will actually execute on their behalf. So this is really about a broader problem than the right kind of invention, right? At the end of the day, cybersecurity, my term is, it's a machine. It's not an event. It's not an invention. It's not one thing. It's an information-driven machine that is going to execute over and over and over again. And folks like, you all and folks like me, we're the fuel, right? We create the information that drives this machine. There's another talk that I give. We wish, and if you like cheesy old movies, and I absolutely do. One of my favorites was Independence Day. If you remember the Will Smith movie, right? The alien. Remember the whole premise: aliens attacking the Earth. Mothership is out there. Heroic folks. So we've captured an alien scout craft. We reverse engineer how to control it. We reverse engineer the software control for it. Brilliant folks create a virus. The heroes get in the captured scout craft, heroically deliver the payload up to the alien mothership, plant the virus, escape just in time. Boom goes the bad guy. The heroes come back, celebratory cigar, parade for the good guys, hooray. Well, I've been doing this for 45 years. No parade for the defender, no parade for the good guys that I've ever seen, right? That's not the way this works. There's no invention. There's no heroism. There's a machine that's running over and over again. And the movie that is closer to is, if you remember, Bill Murray and Groundhog Day, right? That is an event-driven or an information-driven machine where, he replays the same day over and over again, but experiments a bit, gets better, experiments, sometimes the outcome is not as good, but the idea is that he's learning to operate the machine. And that's really the key to any kind of defenses, right? It's not about the top 10 list or the tool or the thing that I buy. It's all of those, but it's also organizing them in a way that can be executed both cost effectively in a business perspective, but also over and over again in order to make sense of the problem. So a couple other things out here. There's a term, and I hope Barry smiles at this, on the Lifting the Fog of War was a book that many of us had to read back in the day. And it was a serious examination of the implications for very high risk decision-making, i.e. warfighting, in what was then we called the emerging information age, right? The availability of all the kind of information from both government, but also commercial sources, information of all levels of quality, of time duration in terms of value, and in terms of certainty about the source of it, and how complicated it is to think about such things. And I used this term for an RSA talk several years ago because I was trying to characterize the problem that we had. We had gone from a environment where we weren't sure what to do about the bad guys, right? Gee, is there a tool? Is there training? Is there something I should do? To the opposite end of the spectrum. We had so many tools. The problem that I was observing around the last third of my career was that it wasn't that we lacked good tools or good threat information or good training or all kinds of good things. In fact, never in our history as defenders, at least in my history as a defender, have we had so much good stuff to work with. The problem is the actual challenge got much bigger faster than we got better. And instead of lacking tools or lacking resources, we had so many that it tended to paralyze people. That is, they were wandering through this fog, right? And the market and the complexity of sort of the social mechanisms to manage risk are so great that it became a burden rather than a help to have so much. And so this notion of fog became my way to talk about this problem. And so we so to use this as a catchphrase in the work that we do at the Center for Internet Security to say, the key is, how do I walk through the fog, right? How do I make sense of this? And who can help me sort of cut through the clutter and the things that are distracting? It's a noisy marketplace. That's just the environment that we live in. So how do we make sense of this and focus on things that are really and truly important? So the quick version of the story, I never offer a problem without attempting to offer also a solution, or at least a way to think about the problem. This notion of spending a lifetime studying failure, and both the things that we observed in our own laboratories through our own analysis, but also what the bad guys were doing to us, and what nations did to each other. I told you I had a bit of an unusual NSA career. I'm one of the few lifelong defenders, I think, certainly of my age in this industry, who also spent his entire career inside an intelligence agency. And so I call that going to grad school in attacks and trying to make sense of this problem, at very large scale. And so I was consumed by this problem. If I could sort of cartoon my career, the first third was learning the craft of finding flaws, manipulating systems, and so forth. The middle third was about managing organizations that did this kind of work on behalf of the US government and the Defense Department and the intelligence community. What that gave me that a lot of people did not have at that time, sort of 80s, 90s time, was the ability to see failure at very large scale, to see all these things happening. And at that time, it was very complex, right? The idea was that there was no more closely held secret at the National Security Agency at that time in history than the outcome of an NSA red team. Again, some of you aren't old enough to even remember this, but the idea then was, oh my goodness, there's an operational flaw in a DoD system. We couldn't possibly tell anyone about that. By the way, that anyone included people who could actually help fix it. And so we had all these little, you might call stovepiped pockets of information about, we would find this in this part of the DoD and this result and this result and this result. But very few people had insight to sort of pull all this together and to say, you know what? 80% of the DoD systems have this problem. Oh, by the way, this problem and its root cause cannot be fixed by the system owner. This might be a problem in DoD policy, or a problem that only the primary IT vendor can fix, or a problem with the way we acquired the software in the first place, or the way we wrote it. And so if you could not gain insight and pull it together across these different sources, you could never make sense of the problem. In an earlier slide, I didn't speak to it, but I said the optimal place to solve a security problem is almost never where you found it. Okay? And by that, I mean, we often find problems in the operational environment. And yes, we can throw a patch at it. We can do a quick configuration change. We can block something at the perimeter. But at the end of the day, the optimal solution is probably not that. It's probably about the way you manage configuration changes across the entire enterprise in the first place, or the way you'd manage administrative privilege, or the way you acquire software and through the integrator get it pre-configured to some sort of security baseline. All those are more foundational solutions to these complex problems. So I started to put these thoughts together in the last third of my career. And for context, it was in 2001 I got permission to release all of the NSA security guidance that we had created for the DoD and intelligence community out to the public. That was actually June of 2001. And so this idea of closing this public-private boundary, right, from the government's problem is different than the private sector's problem, and how would we bring those together? That was a major theme of the last third of my government career also. But once I was out in the public talking about these things, people started to ask me questions. I'm going to reveal some flaw of my past here to this audience. People would say, that's great stuff, Tony, but what do I do first? I said, what do I do first? I never heard that question before. What that tells you is I never had responsibility to fix a problem before, right? There was no better job in this industry than pointing out other people's failings and flaws and then having no responsibility to fix it. And I thought, you know what? That's not the way I want to end my career. And so I started to think about how do I help people fix this problem? And giving them thousands of pages of narrative or infinite lists of to-do things to do doesn't help. And so how do you help people focus in on the smallest number of things that need to get done? So that started, there was an afternoon tabletop. I gathered 5 extraordinary friends and that little NSA DoD project in the left side of the slide here. There was no grand scheme, believe me. This was just an idea. And the challenge to the table was, please do not try to solve peace in our time or world hunger at this meeting. But what are the smallest number of things that we should advise all of our friends to do, not to solve the cyber problem, but to get started? What are the foundational things, the most important things, the things that give that sort of 80-20 value? How do people get going? Because otherwise they are paralyzed. They're wandering through this fog. Well, that turned into, again, it was a very modest project, 2-page letter, nothing. All it said was, based on our experience, if you don't know where to begin, start here. Well, that got a life of its own a year or two later in the late 2000 time window. The CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, And the SANS Institute turned a 2-page letter into a big thing, basically a worldwide activity with a volunteer grassroots movement. Some of you would know it by the name of the SANS Top 20. And it had a life of its own, and we continued to stay involved at NSA because I just really believed in the idea that, can we help people focus in on these sort of basic set of things that we all should do? Fast forward a bit, I retired in 2012. And by not quite coincidence, wound up at the SANS Institute and then took the project over, and with their support, spun it down into a nonprofit, because I believe that the idea was bigger than any for-profit company. And then we merged into the Center for Internet Security, the CIS, and renamed as the CIS Controls in 2015. So the idea was to provide a stable home for this large-scale community volunteerism to pull together ideas, create products, and then sort of work the entire community of vendors and policymakers to focus in on these important things to do. And we do this in alignment with the great work at NIST and lots of other security framework folks who are sort of, they deal with the larger and more comprehensive problem. We are very focused on this challenge of what are the technically most important things to do based upon what bad guys are doing to us. I have a dream, I'm an ex-mathematician, right? That we will make decisions in this industry based upon data. And we're closer than ever. And that was really the motivator to push for some of these ideas here. The other thing I'll point out that is really relevant to the Center for Internet Security, we are not a think tank. We're a small but mighty and scruffy nonprofit that pulls all this together with a worldwide community of volunteers, but we're also an operational element. And this is the kinds of things I worked with Barry back in the day, right? We are the multi-state ISAC, or Information Sharing Analysis Centers for the US. So we have 13,000 state and local tribal territorial enterprises that are members of CIS, and we provide them, we are the centralized watch center, the source of bulletins and advisories and guidance, and help them with incidents and so forth. We cover essentially all the critical infrastructures because of the role that state and local governments play. So we are a 27, watch-oriented, real life. So advice that we give is tempered by that. We're also, as of the last couple of years, the election infrastructure ISAC, and you can imagine what that's been like in terms of activity for the last couple of years. The other thing I'll mention is about data. What we have done, I told you the origin of our guidance is about gathering smart people together and get them to agree on something. And that's the way we have traditionally done things in this industry. But there's lots of good folks that have been thinking about more data-driven defense for quite some time. I'm one of them. And I've thought about how do we pull all this together. Here's the conceptual model that we have here. This is not rocket science. This is just about getting organized and having discipline. We work with folks like the Verizon Data Breach Report. We are a source of our own operational data from the ISAC. We work with a number of threat intelligence companies. I will proudly add Secureworks to that list once I talk to Barry after this event. And we don't want all your data. What we want is summaries of this information in a way that can be aligned with models. And we use primarily the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is the closest thing to we have as a universal way to technically describe attack types and individual attacks, and put that together. And this, again, I mentioned the most important verb is translate as opposed to share. And we work this exercise of translating into action or specific recommendations based upon data, our notion of recommendations, which are the CIS critical security controls. We also have a subset of that we call implementation groups, which we refer to as basic cyber hygiene. That is a foundational set of things that everyone ought to do. But the goal here, I won't go through, this is not a commercial for something we give away for free, but the goal here is to have under the hood, because most enterprises in our economy will never read complex threat reports. They aren't capable of sort of gathering all that information and translating it into action. And it turns out most of them don't have to. Right? This is a mass market view of attacks translated into mass market action. And so we do this on behalf of the community. The model is under the hood, and that underpins the recommendations that we make. And I think this is an important part of the way we think about such things in the future, right? The way we pull information that is gleaned from threat analysis, that is pulled from sensors, that flows from the business models of companies like yours. Again, we don't need all the data in one place. That was the great flaw of many of the ideas of the 90s well, if we just had one giant database of incidents, everyone will cheerfully throw all that information into one place and we'll mine it and the wisdom will emerge. Well, that has never happened successfully in my existence, including within the government, right? Who will agencies will often fight you tooth and nail over the legal issues and classification issues, et cetera. So but again, we don't need all that data. What we need is to be able to summarize and abstract it and pull lessons from it in an organized way that can be used to underpin what should we all do about this information. I would like to take just a moment to talk a little bit about sort of a broader look at this. This is a diagram I did for my workforce many years ago. It was to help us think about the world that we're in. This is you'll see lots of these different sort of quad charts as people think about these kinds of issues. On the left side, attackers and defenders. On the bottom, tactical and strategic. And most of this business, I will say, grew up on the left side of this diagram, right? You know, attackers are doing this. Quick, let's patch the problem. You know, let's put in place a configuration change that will stop them next time. You know, let's block this port or the service or this protocol. And it is an incredibly demanding environment because it's minute by minute, right? You don't get to ignore it. You have to survive to fight another day. And so both defenders and attackers spend a tremendous amount of energy and attention and resources dealing with all these, what I would call left side issues. And this was my way of characterizing the work that we were doing at NSA at the time. And what I was doing was pushing us to the right side. You know, this is my language for sort of management slang. That is, you know, we can try to fight today's fight faster, but we should be learning from this in order to change the fight for the next day, right? Through things like, if you look at the upper right, security engineering, software engineering, you know, more analytics, better intelligence. And you, folks like you, have really driven and pushed these ideas to the right side, right? We have to do both, but we have to think of them as connected problems, right? We learn from today so we can do better for tomorrow. From the attacker perspective, though, and again, I had the privilege of sitting in on this morning sessions to see some of the great thinking about things like adversaries, attackers, and their capabilities and intentions, right? This is not about one-offs. This is about nation-to-nation sort of, you can't separate the criminal activity from the nation activity. This is a giant blur that is often connected under the hood. And so it's important to not treat this as, okay, big supply chain attack, clean up on aisle 9. Okay, we're done with that. There's a lot more potentially that's going on under the hood or behind the scenes, right? Was that a test? Was that a way to check our defenses? Was that a way to put things in place? Is that a way to distract from other activities that are being conducted? These are the kinds of deeper, more thoughtful analyses that we need to be constantly reminding ourselves of. They are not as flashy, they're not as demanding in the here and now, but they're incredibly important for the future of the way we think about this business and how we pull together the sort of tactical and strategic way of thinking about these problems. Because we know the bad guy is doing this, right? These are not, one-off things. These are carefully planned. The terms of things like campaigns and there are many of them running often in parallel, and one feeds the other, and the criminality can become like the experimental ground or the place to test out ideas, or the way to deal with say dissidents in the country, another way to test out tools. So there's a tremendous amount of work going on that's very thoughtful and very complex that we need to keep our eye on, or we'll never be able to make sort of the long-term progress. And at the pace that things are going, there is no way for us to fight today's fight much faster, frankly, than we are today. And so we absolutely need new ways to think about this problem and the ways to go after this. The last thing, this is from the Twitter feed for Secureworks. They asked me to come up with a quote to help sort of provoke thought. And this was the one that I came up with. And it used to be, I used to joke, if you said threat sharing is overrated inside the DC Beltway, you were asking for career death. But because threat sharing was going to solve every problem. But I hope the lesson that you took from us here is about, it's not that I undervalue threat sharing. I've spent my entire life doing the kind of work that folks like you do. And it was really, frankly, exciting and thrilling for me to see these bright young minds doing all this amazing kind of work and the sustained analysis and, being able to pull together different threads to make sense of both the technical and then the tradecraft that's going on. Believe me, I've lived that life. I have nothing but the greatest respect for the kind of work that gets done in places like Secureworks. But the point is, we're not generating this information for its own sake, right? We're generating this information because it's an essential component to what I call the machinery of defense. That is, its value is beyond the one-to-one, right? We found this bad guy doing this thing, we can fix this thing. This is about this translation into both tactical and strategic activity and defensive machinery that is very complex but essential in order to change the fight from this, one-to-one to this idea of how do we build more defenses in that people don't need to choose or configure on their own. Folks like me grew up in what I call the build it yourself model of security, right? Which is just not sustainable. It's not even feasible for most of our economy. And so the work that you do to help individual customers to solve individual problems is really important. But also this grander vision of what we need to do at a national level to defend ourselves, right? How do we take all this information and how do we translate it into both strategic changes or policy changes or regulatory changes that will allow us to do better? And you're seeing the glimmers of that now through things like, if you followed the Solarium Commission report and things like the notion of a Bureau of Cyber Statistics or the equivalent of the National Traffic Safety Board, things like that, right? These are machinery, national machinery that would allow us to do this translation from all the today activity into what we need to do tomorrow. So that's the kind of life I've lived. My goal over the last, say, 40 minutes or so for 45 years was to give a little insight into the way I've thought about this problem, the kind of challenges that I think are ahead, the complexity of sort of pulling together information that we generate really through the chaos of today's environment, but also then think about how do we both solve today's problems so we could live to fight another day, but also translate it into national activity. So this has been the life that I've had the honor to live. As I mentioned, along the way, I've had the great opportunity to work with folks like Barry as I said, everything that we did was a first of back then. And a lot of rules that we take for granted or activities in the U.S. government even today, were pioneered by folks like Barry and his compatriots down the Defense Department and folks that I worked with at the National Security Agency. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I would be honored to take any questions that you have. I'm not insulted if you don't have questions, but hey, I'm one of the old guys here, so I'm perfectly willing to share either goofy stories or stories of mistakes along the way or lessons that I've got along the way. So thank you all very much for the time and opportunity.
Cool. Thank you very much, Tony. I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed the last 40 minutes. Barry had told me that I would love your presentation, and I absolutely did. We'll wait and see if there are questions that come in. I guess one from me. There's several very seminal statements in your presentation. Fixing things is about behavior, finding the minimum number of things that people can do. The pragmatism of, the SANS Top 20 that you're now the custodian of with the CIS controls. Right. What are your frustrations about the fact that here we are, I won't say how many years later, and still it seems that pragmatism isn't landing in the wider security community, that we still see people who are out trying to procure a magic unicorn detector rather than understanding where their assets are. Where are your frustrations, and what can we do to help?
Yeah, so wonderful. And yes, you've nailed the dilemma here. I always said that you can't survive for decades in this business unless you're a complete cynic or a hopeless optimist. And both parties have all the evidence they need to prove themselves right. So there are still people, people whose textbooks I'm not worthy to carry from the late 60s and 70s, the masters whose papers I was reading right back then, still to this day, standing on the street corner, we solved this problem in 1969 with UptiFrats 9000 mathematically verified kernelized operating system, blah, 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 and I get it. I mean, I share that frustration, right? That the things that we know ought to get done are not getting done. And the same problems, I once shared with my son, who's now in this business, by the way, and his background was in economics. And I shared with him, I said, well, my son, welcome to the business. The bad news is my generation apparently will not solve a single foundational computer security problem before my time runs out. And so clearly we need some new blood. But the good news, I think, and again, I'm the hopeless optimist, of course, so I wouldn't have survived here, is that what we're seeing now is economic machinery come into action, right? So before it was, if we can either scare the executives enough or invent the technology that's perfect enough, then the problem will get better. I gave up on that decades ago. And I say that with great respect to brilliant people who worked the computer security problem for decades. But now the economics, right? The role of insurance companies and lawyers and judges and the supply chain issues, regulatory agencies, you know, it's frightening to old folks like me, right? And I always say the wizardry model of security is, you know, its best value is its job security for old guys like me, but it's terrible public policy. We need these mechanisms to stand up. Now, the problem is we have to negotiate the balance between what's required, what's incentivized. But the machinery, I think, is starting to come into place. And, you know, because there's so much at stake, right? We see very clear losses in the economy. We see crippling of critical infrastructure, right? And by the way, I grew up in the 70s. You know, when I started my career, I had to wait in gas lines. I never thought I'd wait in a gasoline line again. And now we're like talking about this kind of stuff, pipeline disruptions. You know, so I think the sign of optimism, and it will be painful, is this transition to how do we manage risk in an intelligent way. That means we need to create sort of a codification and the infrastructure where most people can make rational decisions without becoming experts. We are not going to, like, you know, train our way to greatness in this. We need to train people. I sound like such an old fogey here, right? We need to train people, but to be more aware. But we're not. That's not the solution. That's just a piece of the solution.
Yeah, I mean, that harks back actually to the equation you put up very early in your deck, which is effectively an expected value. You know, what's the likelihood of a cyber incident occurring compared to the cost of it? And as Alex spoke about in his presentation, we've gone from incidents costing you know, hundreds of dollars to incidents costing millions of dollars, and that definitely focuses the mind. And I guess the frustration in the past was the intangible cost of, well, what does it cost if someone steals something from the DoD?
And Don, let me answer part two of your question. I'm sorry, I went on a bit, but the two, how can you help? There's two things. One, the cooperation of the great companies like Secureworks and others, right, is essential. And there's great work to be done. There's amazing people doing it. So we both, again, as I said, we have to both fight today's fight, help the customers that you have, but also think about what can I abstract from that can be used to drive policy, that can be used to be codified in security frameworks and so forth. And I say this respectfully, like Marcel, Alex, Mark, everyone gave some classic and very good, very well-reasoned recommendations. Do 2MF, you know, do multi-factor, do this, do that. Absolutely. The problem is that list by itself never solves the problem, right? No executive who makes a decision what to spend looks at that list and says, wow, I never thought of that one before. Mm-hmm. You know, they need to be driven by other mechanisms. And so it's nice to help people, but what's really important is this ecosystem of tools and requirements and business machinery that goes into place. And so, you know, we represent CIS, and this is not a commercial. Again, we're a very small nonprofit. So, but, you know, pointing to, you know, people need not a list, but a plan. They need a group of things, an ecosystem to help them achieve these good intentions, not a top 10 list, which they can get from any magazine in this business in October, right? That's when all these things come out, the top 5 or 7 or 9 or whatever your magic number happens to be. So let's look for opportunities if anyone is interested at Secureworks. I was going to bug Barry about things that we might do together to say, again, not to take your data or the value, but what can we abstract from it that would help drive these bigger themes, or that could be used as part of federal thinking?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a much misused quote that someone from your former organization said that my job is to know your network better than you, sort of thing.
Yes.
And you talked about the wide reach there, and obviously our incident response team with over 1,400 engagements a year.
Right.
We see, unfortunately, similar and same old mistakes that map directly to critical security controls all the time. I guess a sort of slightly different question, which may be more difficult for you to answer. With things in the US, such as Colonial Pipeline and other things like that, we now really have, as you said, you know, an impact on resilience in Western democracies.
Right.
There's also a national security element, obviously, to cyber, so that spans both private enterprise and some really important government things.
So,
how do you think the government should go about this? The balance between compliance regimes, regulation, the role of organizations like CISA, and I know that we've only got like 2 minutes here, so.
Yes, a wonderful question.
Because you're clearly a pragmatist. How do you think? What would your advice be to people in power?
Well, so this is, as you know, is a heated debate, even as we speak, right, around the role of CISA and all this. And I will say this, I grew up in the world, anything we do, here's the quick summary. Anything we do that involves risk has 3 sort of big buckets, right? The stuff you're required to do, whether it's law, regulation, directive, et cetera, what the marketplace can encourage or discourage, and individual behavior. Right. And that's true in any, this is my way of thinking about it. Every risk endeavor has some element of those. I will say in sort of classical national defense, it's that first bin, the role of the government is the dominant one, without question, right? Companies don't raise an army, you pay your taxes, we raise an army, we go fight over there. But in this case, I think the middle bin has to be by far the dominant one. That is, we need the federal government, and there's great resources, there's great people to sort of help separate truth, frankly, from fiction, and to sort of enforce behavior. But the middle part around market incentives, I think we, the industry, and I, having part of that since 2012, at least in the nonprofit, we need to get our act together and align it with national priorities. Otherwise, we face the danger of, overachieving on bid number one, which is what is the discussion today, right? We need to regulate everybody. And I just think, having watched, I don't think we need to do that, by the way, right? We don't actually need the details of every incident found by every company in the industry. I think there's not that much to be learned. We actually know quite a bit that's already there. We're just seeing repeats of it. So I think this is really the focus is on the marketplace, on sort of self-organization, and there's peril there. I get it, and having observed that from the government side.
And it's, as you said, these guys are not magicians. We all roll our eyes every time an organization's hit by an advanced actor that's tried novel techniques, and we all know that that's not true. So that's right. The patterns are there, as you say. Unfortunately, we're out of time, Tony. I'd like to thank you again sincerely for such a pragmatic view of the world and giving us, the advantage of your many years of experience. So
thank you very much, John. I absolutely appreciate the opportunity, and it was great to reconnect with Barry, my old friend, and again, great company. It's an honor, and I hope there's more things for us to do together in the future.